As we saw last time, we saw a line taking the viewer's eye through a picture. Here at this train station in Madrid, we see the use of line doing just that, taking the viewer back in space. But here on this lesson, we're going to talk about shape. Now the lines that we're talking about all of a sudden are making shapes. As we see these triangular type shapes before your eyes. Everything now becomes a triangle. We have all the lines in between, but we see shapes evolving. So now line is making shape. Here's another example. Same kind of directional to a focal point or a vanishing point, as we learned in perspective. The lines taking us through the image. But again, look at the triangles that are being created. These are shapes. All these lines are making up shapes. Even the sky here, which is an empty space, becomes a shape. The train is another shape. This space here, shape. The sidewalk here is only a shape. In the next image we will see that it's not just triangles to vanishing points. In this photo, looking up at the roof of a cathedral, we see the line beginning to show more character, more curves. They're not just necessarily the straight lines that we had seen. We talked about this earlier. But we also see them creating shapes. The ceiling is a series of shapes. The closer you look, the more shapes we see. So line is becoming shape. Now here we have the line creating shape, as we're seeing. These become shapes. The lines are breaking it up compositionally, but they're creating shapes. Interesting shapes. We have squares and curves, but mostly it becomes just shape. In much of the architecture, especially in Europe, where we see all this detail, we see all the lines creating shapes, but within those shapes we have beautiful detail, which if we look close is a bunch of little lines. But in this sense, we are just concerned about the shape. And the lines are creating just beautiful shapes. Look at this. Intricate shapes everywhere. So line is actually shape in many, many forms. Here at the Guggenheim in Bilbao, northern Spain, we see that classical line taking us through the image, like we saw in the previous video. But now we notice that it's creating a shape. Interesting shapes. Now we have triangular shapes that we see repeated through this very modern architecture. The same architect that did the Disney concert hall downtown Los Angeles. But we see the shapes dominating the composition. This bridge in, again, Bilbao, northern Spain, shows us again how line is once again taking us through the image, but it is also creating interesting shapes. This round shape is created by the lines, and here that same rounded shape is echoed. So we have a very interesting contrast of rounded shapes. Here in Utah, we have natural rock formations that are also giving us that rounded shape, that repeat of curves that gives us a very aesthetically pleasing for the eye. This roundedness, it becomes a pattern that's repeated and gives us a feeling of rhythm, roundness. These nice curved lines create a shape. Not quite a circle, but almost. Not quite a circle, but almost. Not quite a circle, but almost. Hints of circles throughout. Shapes circular. As we look at a painting by Van Gogh, we see the similar style. We have these soft lines, again moving us through, but at the same time creating shapes. We have that circular feeling that we saw in the last image of that rock formation, but basically doing the same thing but with paint. We see the circular feelings throughout created by the brushstroke. Here in this Cezanne, we see the brushstroke is actually making shapes. Shapes. If you look at these brushstrokes here, these little areas are creating shapes. These are all brushstroke areas. These trees, the brushstrokes are making small shapes. So if we look at this painting overall, it's a series of shapes. In this painting, we see the brushstrokes not as much, but we see everything broken down into shapes. It's a series of shapes creating a nice, pleasing composition, but everything is a shape. These are shapes. Shapes. Everywhere you look is a shape. And they all add up to the overall image. It is basically a compilation of a bunch of little shapes. Again, with Van Gogh, we see that the brush strokes become lines, and the lines become shapes. Everywhere, shapes. Shapes. Everything is a shape. And that, in turn, is our composition. We have the golden mean, third, and a third. Again, Van Gogh, and he's one of my favorite artists. But you look at everything that he does and you see the shape and composition. We have the lines going to a vanishing point in the distance. We have the corners coming in, creating a nice composition, and we have shapes in between, and there becomes a pattern of shapes. When we look at it, we have a rhythm. This shape becomes this shape, becomes this shape. This shape becomes this shape, becomes this shape, becomes this shape, and this shape. It's a nice rhythm that becomes inherent in the photo, in the picture, because of the lines creating shapes, and then within the shapes there's even more shapes. One of my favorite paintings of all time is Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. Now, as you can see, we have plenty of lines, lots of little lines, but we also see shapes being created by these lines. Now, we'll look at this further down the road because it encompasses so many beautiful things. We have lines, we have shapes, we have a rhythm that is created by the lines, but we also have, for this purpose or this lesson, beautiful, beautiful shapes. Everywhere shapes. We'll see this one again. To finish off, we'll use Van Gogh's famous Starry Night. Here we have everything. We have lines, plenty of lines. We have shapes repeating itself, creating a rhythm. All these lines make a texture, which we will also talk about later. But we see the lines creating shapes. Beautiful, swirling shapes. Everything becomes a shape that gives it an overall feeling, a one of wavy, almost hypnotic type atmosphere. Thank you.